The invitation arrived that afternoon, an elegant envelope placed neatly on the kitchen counter beside the stack of unopened mail. Jane read the gold-embossed lettering, instantly recognizing the name, Mr. Foster, her husband's boss. A formal gathering at his lavish estate, a networking event disguised as a social evening. She sighed, already knowing the answer before she asked. "Are you going to this?" she messaged her husband, though she knew work would be his excuse. A few minutes later, his reply came. "I can't. Late meetings. You should still go. Good for appearances." Jane stared at the screen, the familiar frustration creeping in. He always had late meetings, always had business to handle. Lately, it felt like she was nothing more than an accessory to his corporate image, expected to be present at events like these, to smile and make polite conversation, but never truly a priority. Resigned, she slipped into a fitted black dress that accentuated her figure, applied a touch of red lipstick, and hailed a car to take her to the Foster estate. The house was breathtaking. Large chandeliers illuminated the marble floors, and the scent of expensive cologne and aged whiskey filled the air. She moved through the crowd, recognizing familiar faces from past corporate events. Men in tailored suits laughed loudly, their wives perched elegantly at their sides, sipping wine and exchanging pleasantries. Jane accepted a drink from a passing waiter, taking small sips as she listened to a group discuss investment strategies she had no interest in. The evening stretched on, the conversations blending into one another. She checked her phone under the table, no message from her husband. He hadn't even asked if she had arrived safely. Seeking a moment of quiet, she wandered past the main gathering area, weaving through the grand hallways until she reached a less crowded part of the house. She found herself in a spacious lounge, dimly lit, where a man knelt beside a cabinet, adjusting the wiring of a modem. He glanced up at her, his hazel eyes locking onto hers for a second before he smirked. "Let me guess. Escaping the party?" His voice was casual, confident. He wore dark jeans and a fitted work shirt with a company logo stitched over his chest. Strong arms, rough hands, clearly someone who worked with them often. Jane leaned against the doorway, intrigued by the contrast. "Something like that. You?" "Fixing your host's internet. Guess even millionaires can't avoid bad Wi-Fi." He chuckled, tightening a cable before standing up, wiping his hands. "Alex." "Jane." She extended her hand, and when he shook it, his grip was firm, warm. The contact lingered just a moment longer than necessary. A spark. Unexpected, but undeniable. She could still hear the chatter from the party down the hall, but suddenly, it felt much further away. Jane found herself lingering near the lounge, pretending to admire the framed paintings on the walls, while stealing glances at Alex. Something about him held her attention. His easy confidence, the way his hands moved as he worked. Or maybe it was the simple fact that he actually seemed present. Unlike her husband, who barely noticed her anymore, Alex acknowledged her, looked at her like she was someone worth talking to. She stepped back into the room, leaning casually against the doorway. "So is bad Wi-Fi the biggest crisis you deal with, or do you get the occasional damsel in distress?" she teased, her lips curling into a smirk as she sipped her wine. Alex chuckled, shaking his head as he tightened a cable. "Oh, you'd be surprised. People freak out when they can't refresh their Instagram. I've seen full meltdowns over Netflix buffering." Jane laughed, the sound light and genuine. "And here I thought you were just a tech guy. Turns out you're also an emergency responder." He grinned, closing the cabinet and turning toward her. "That's right. Fixing signals and saving lives, one Wi-Fi connection at a time." Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them shifted, growing heavier, charged with an unspoken challenge. Jane felt it in the way Alex looked at her, the slow way his gaze traveled from her eyes to her lips and back again. Her heart pounded harder than it should have. She knew this feeling. It was the same thrill she had once felt in the early days with her husband, the rush of being seen, wanted. But that had faded over the years, replaced by empty conversations and cold dinners eaten in silence. Now, here she was, standing in front of a man who was looking at her like she was something to be admired. Alex leaned slightly closer, close enough that she could smell the faint scent of his cologne, something dark and rich. "You know," he said, his voice lower, smoother, "I've never had someone keep me company while I worked before. Usually, they just want me in and out as fast as possible." Jane tilted her head, feigning innocence. "Well, maybe I just enjoy good conversation." "Or maybe," Alex countered, stepping just an inch closer, "you're looking for a distraction." Her breath hitched. He wasn't wrong, but she wasn't ready to admit that. Not to him, not to herself. Instead, she let the silence stretch between them, neither confirming nor denying. Then, as if testing her limits, Alex reached past her, his arm brushing against hers as he grabbed his tablet from the counter. The touch was brief, but it sent a jolt down her spine. He didn't move away immediately, didn't apologize for the contact. Jane should have taken that as her cue to leave, to put distance between them before the temptation grew stronger. But she didn't move. She didn't want to. The music from the main party faded into a distant hum as Jane stepped deeper into the quiet hallway, her heels clicking softly against the polished marble floor. She hadn't planned to look for him, yet here she was, following an unspoken pull, seeking out the one person who had made her feel something tonight. In the dimly lit side lounge, Alex stood by the router cabinet, finishing the last adjustments. His head lifted the moment she entered, his eyes locking onto hers with a knowing look. There was no need for words. The energy between them had been shifting from the moment they met, but now, in this secluded space, it felt different. Heavier, more dangerous. Jane leaned against the doorframe, her fingers grazing the stem of her wine glass. "All fixed?" Her voice was quieter now, softer. Alex set down his tablet, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Yeah," he said, a slight smirk playing on his lips. "But I get the feeling you didn't come here to check on the Wi-Fi." She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she took a slow sip of her wine, letting the warmth settle in her chest as she studied him. The confidence in his stance, the way his eyes traveled over her like he was trying to read her thoughts, it was intoxicating. He didn't ask her to explain herself, didn't question why she had left the party full of important people to stand in a quiet room with a man she barely knew. "I should go," Jane murmured, but she didn't move. Alex took a step forward, closing the space between them just enough for her to catch the faint scent of his cologne. "Do you want to?" His voice was low, his question not just about leaving but about everything. She should have said yes. She should have turned around and walked back to the crowd, back to the safety of a life that, until now, had felt predictable and controlled. But instead, she tilted her chin up slightly, her breath catching as Alex reached out, his fingers grazing her wrist. The touch was light, barely there, yet it sent a shiver up her arm. Her pulse quickened, and for a second, the weight of responsibility and consequence disappeared. There was only this moment, only the way his touch lingered, waiting for her permission to go further. Jane exhaled shakily, then, without fully thinking, she closed the distance. Her lips met his in a kiss that was hesitant at first, testing the boundaries of something she knew she shouldn't want. But as soon as Alex responded, as soon as his hand slid gently to the curve of her waist, a spark ignited inside her. The kiss deepened, months, years of neglect and longing unraveling in an instant. It was reckless, it was wrong, but the rush of it drowned out every logical thought. When she finally pulled away, breathless, Alex studied her with an expression unreadable yet knowing. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. What had just happened had already changed everything. The phone buzzed softly on the nightstand, the screen illuminating the dimly lit room. "I can't stop thinking about earlier." The message sat there, waiting. Fingers hovered over the screen, hesitation warring with the undeniable pull of temptation. The warmth from the stolen moment still lingered, the imprint of touch, of whispered breaths, impossible to ignore. A glance to the side, steady breathing, the familiar rise and fall of a chest that once made her feel safe, now only a reminder of the growing distance. The weight of guilt pressed down, but it wasn't enough to stop what was already unraveling. Me either. The response was sent before logic could intervene. The thrill spiked instantly, a rush spreading through her veins. The wait wasn't long. I want more. A slow inhale. The truth was, so did she. The craving wasn't just for the physical, it was the attention, the desire in every word, the way it made her feel seen, wanted. We shouldn't. A lie, one neither of them believed. But we will. The certainty in the reply sent a shiver through every nerve. The game had begun, a dangerous dance where every message tightened the invisible string binding them together. The messages grew bolder, a slow descent into something reckless and consuming. What started as innocent conversation turned into late-night confessions, teasing words, subtle hints that bled into something deeper. Tell me what you're wearing. A pause. A smirk tugged at her lips. Wouldn't you like to know? I'd rather take it off. The air in the room felt heavier. The guilt should have been stronger, but the thrill was intoxicating. A quick glance at the sleeping figure beside her, oblivious, unaware of the storm raging inside. You shouldn't say things like that. And yet you keep replying. The truth stung, laced with temptation. Every message was a step further away from reason, from the life she had carefully built. But nothing had made her feel alive like this in years. The nights became longer, conversations stretching into the early hours. Memories of their brief encounters fueled the words they shared, each message a thread pulling them deeper into something they couldn't walk away from. I want to feel you again. The phone felt too warm in her hands. A simple response would change everything. The moment stretched, filled with an aching need to deny what had already been decided. Tell me when. The final line crossed. There was no turning back now. The excuse came easily. A last-minute errand, a meeting that couldn't be rescheduled, a simple need for space. No suspicions, no questions. A quick kiss on the cheek before stepping out the door, the kind that had long lost any real meaning. The drive felt longer than it was, the anticipation stretching every second. Every stoplight, every turn brought the tension higher, the pulse quickening. The messages had built this moment for days, each one a promise, a confession, a step deeper into something that was no longer innocent. The parking lot was nearly empty, tucked away behind an old office building where no one would look. The car sat in the shadows, engine running low, headlights off. Stepping out, the air felt heavier, charged. The door opened, a hand reaching, pulling her in before a single word could be spoken. Lips met instantly, no hesitation this time. No careful pause, no testing the waters. The hunger was immediate, raw, unrestrained. Hands tangled in hair, fingertips pressing into skin, the weight of restraint finally breaking. Breathless, the space between them disappeared entirely. A hand slid down a thigh, gripping, pulling closer. The scent of cologne mixed with the warmth of body heat, the sound of heavy breathing filling the quiet. Fingertips traced along exposed skin, every touch sending fire through veins. The urgency turned slower, more deliberate, exploring, memorizing, savoring. The rush of secrecy, of knowing this shouldn't be happening, only made it more intoxicating. A whispered name, a deep exhale, the feeling of skin on skin, of lips trailing lower, of every stolen second pushing them further past the point of no return. A vibration against the seat, a phone screen lighting up in the darkness. The name on the display shattered the illusion instantly. Reality sliced through the haze, sharp and undeniable. Breathing slowed, hands stilled. A flicker of hesitation. A choice. A moment of clarity warred with the overwhelming need to stay, to let this continue, to give in fully to the pull that had taken over everything. But the damage was already done. The line had already been crossed. A final kiss, lingering, reluctant, before pulling away. No words spoken, only a glance that held every unspoken thought between them. The door opened. The cool night air hit like a slap. Steps felt too heavy, the walk back to the car longer than before. A deep inhale. A shaking hand gripping the wheel. The screen lit up again, a message waiting. "I need more of you." The response came before doubt could settle in. Soon. The ignition turned. The road stretched ahead. There was no turning back. The shift had not gone unnoticed. The late nights spent glued to the screen, the way conversations had become shorter, the subtle withdrawal from shared routines, each small change adding up like puzzle pieces forming an undeniable picture. The phone had become an extension of her hand, constantly buzzing with messages that she guarded too closely. Soft smiles at unread texts, the hurried way the screen was flipped face down whenever footsteps approached, the way her fingers lingered over the keyboard longer than necessary, signs too obvious to ignore. The suspicion had been there for weeks, creeping in quietly at first, then growing louder with every late-night excuse and every glance stolen at a glowing screen. The tension built, an unspoken question hanging heavy in the air, waiting for confirmation. And then the moment came. Carelessness. A single lapse in vigilance. The phone, usually clutched tight or hidden away, left unattended on the kitchen counter. A faint vibration, a message preview flashing on the screen. "I need more of you." The words landed like a punch to the gut. No ambiguity. No room for misinterpretation. Fingers clenched around the device, scrolling, message after message, the truth unraveling with every exchange. The secrecy, the meetings, the undeniable intimacy woven between the words. A confession written in texts, proof of every stolen moment. The sound of water shutting off in the bathroom barely registered. Footsteps approached, slow, hesitant, unaware of what was waiting outside the door. The handle turned. Steam poured into the hallway as she stepped out, towel wrapped loosely around damp skin, reaching for her phone out of habit. It wasn't where she had left it. Eyes lifted, locking onto the figure standing in the doorway, the device held tightly in his grip. The look on his face, anger, hurt, disbelief, spoke louder than any accusation. Silence stretched, thick and suffocating. The air between them crackled with tension, charged with all the unspoken words that could no longer be avoided. A sharp inhale, a step forward, a voice that was too calm, too measured. "Explain." A heartbeat skipped, the world tilted, the excuses, the justifications, the weak denials all lined up in her head, but none of them would be enough. The truth sat between them, undeniable, unfixable. Lips parted, but no words came. Nothing could undo what had already been exposed. Say something. A breath. A swallow. A sinking realization. The damage was done. The silence shattered in an instant. The first words were not spoken, but thrown. Sharp, raw, cutting straight to the wound. How long? No hesitation, no build-up, just the demand for truth. The weight of betrayal sat thick in the air, pressing against every breath. The response stuck in a dry throat, too many answers, none of them enough. Eyes darted toward the phone still clutched tightly in his hand, the messages laid bare, the evidence undeniable. Was it worth it? The voice shook, but not with sadness, anger, betrayal, something deeper, something irreversible. Steps closed the space between them, but there was no warmth, only distance that had never felt wider. Excuses bubbled up, but they were useless. What justification could exist? Loneliness, neglect, a slow drifting apart. None of it erased the messages, the lies, the moments spent in someone else's arms. You could have talked to me. Instead, you did this. Each word hit like a hammer, chipping away at the fragile remains of what once was. The ultimatum came next. Clear, cold, final. End it, now or leave. A choice placed at her feet, demanding resolution. The phone felt like a burning weight in her palm, a single contact standing between the past and the future. Fingers trembled as the message was typed, the words deliberate, yet hesitant. He knows. The response came almost immediately. Come to me. We can figure this out together. A deep inhale. The weight of reality settled in, heavier than ever. One step toward the door meant leaving behind everything. The life built, the vows spoken, the history shared. A step backward meant killing the fire that had brought back the feeling of being alive, of being seen, of being wanted. 2 roads, 2 choices, both full of regret. Eyes met across the room, searching for something, an answer, a reason, a sign. There was none. Only pain. Only waiting. The decision had to be made, and there was no turning back.